Okay, so today we are going to be discussing Auguste Comte. This is kind of a exciting lecture because Comte actually created the word sociology. Okay, so Auguste Comte was born in 1798 in Montpellier in France. In addition to being the founder of sociology, arguably, given that he created the word, he was a French philosopher and mathematician. He was a very scientific-minded person and a mathematically inclined thinker. He invented the word sociology in 1838. And an interesting fact about Comte is that the flag of Brazil, still today, it quotes him saying "order and progress." As we will get into today, these order and progress are two fundamental qualities to Comtean thinking. All right, so an important part of Comte's academic career was his relationship with Henry de Saint-Simon, pictured here. Saint-Simon was also a French philosopher and a mathematically inclined one at that. Saint-Simon created this term known as social physics. It was his belief that society can be studied in a scientific manner similar to the ways in which we were studying physics and chemistry and biology, all of the natural sciences, and that the study of society did not need to rely upon philosophy, but rather it could advance toward understanding society through the scientific method. Social physics upholds that social order must be achieved when there is a sense of social disorder, that social harmony must be achieved, and this achievement can be made through the advancement toward a more scientifically based study of society, what he called social physics. Comte was greatly influenced by Saint-Simon, and some say he even arguably plagiarized Saint-Simon. When Comte used his word sociology, it has considerable overlap, a lot of similarities with Saint-Simon's notion of social physics. It's important to note that Saint-Simon and Comte had a close relationship at one point when Comte was his research assistant, but the two eventually had many personal differences with one another, differences that were so intense that the two had to part ways with each other. Comte was thus has been accused of plagiarizing Saint-Simon's notion of social physics, merely giving it a new name of sociology, which he envisaged would be a study of society that was based on science rather than theology or metaphysics, and a study of society that would achieve social harmony, again, through the advancement of the scientific method as we apply it to the social world. Comte had some mental health issues in his life, even trying to commit suicide at least once jumping into a river that he failed to kill himself with this attempt, however. He eventually would check himself into a mental health hospital in 1826 when Comte was 28. This is an important detail partially because opponents of Comte's understanding of sociology and his goal of sociology would often use these mental health problems that Comte was facing as a basis to try to take him down, so to speak. They would use ad hominem attacks, meaning personal attacks against Comte, rather than trying to critique his argument. There were many who were opposed to this notion that society can be studied in a scientific way, in the same way that we study the natural sciences, and they would often use Comte's mental health with some really, just frankly, ugly attacks, really unethical accusations against Comte because of his mental health, which they then attached to his argument for a positivist sociology. We will talk more about what I mean by positivist in the coming slides. The, let's say, drama-filled debates revolving around what Comte was putting forth have been described as, here we have quote below, admiration, attack, criticism, praise, violent repudiation, and equally violent espousal. That was a quote from Luther and Jesse Bernard, who studied the history of social science in the USA shortly after Comte's writings were introduced to U.S. scholars in the mid-19th century. It stirred a great deal of emotions, not only in France where Comte was writing, but also here in the U.S. There were those who, as Bernard and Bernard note, very much in favor of Comte's system, that we can study society scientifically, and there were also those who were staunchly opposed to Comte's proposal that we can reach a scientific sociology. It was this latter group that would often attack Comte's mental health. What's more, that added fuel to the flame for Comte's opponents is that Comte was a bit strange in some of his goals. The one thing that people associate Comte's, let's say, peculiarity with is his proposal for a religion of humanity. Comte tried to create his own religion, one which he thought could swallow the Catholic Church. He was a humanist, meaning that he believed that human pride and success should be measured through human accomplishments in this worldly sphere rather than the otherworldly sphere, meaning that the accomplishments here on earth made by human beings should be the basis of our pride, rather than a veneration toward a god in what he would consider to be in another world, another realm, what he would consider to be a fictional realm. This religion of humanity endeavored to create social order. Comte believed that human beings needed some sort of religion, some sort of ritual and community, though he did not think that the current religions were sufficient through their lack of scientific prowess and validity. He thus proposed that we replace the saints that we venerate, with scientists and philosophers such as David Hume and Adam Smith. He also mirrored Catholic ritual. He would have these rituals on Sundays. There would be lectures about morality and science. It very closely mirrored the ritualistic aspects of Christianity, but it took out the content, the Christian content, and replaced it with a scientific content. This was a large part of why people had somewhat of an aversion to and skepticism of Comte, because they found this project of what he called the religion of humanity to be very strange. So, as I said about the Comte's invention of sociology, that being a scientific sociology, having quite a following here in the U.S. at the time, as well as, of course, opponents in the U.S. He also had some devout followers in America who wanted to carry out this project known as the religion of humanity. Comte was admired by these followers. He had correspondences with them that show that these followers would take his advice for building chapels in their backyards to host followers of the religion of humanity, where they would have lectures of morality and the importance of advancing the scientific method. He writes in a historiography by Luther and Jesse Bernard, they note that, quote, the positive religion prescribes nothing except with regard to temples whose axes should everywhere be pointed toward Paris, end quote, was an instruction here quoted from Comte. It should be noted that Comte was residing in Paris at that time. He wanted to be the leader of this religion of humanity, which he hoped would end up swallowing Catholicism. He provided these followers of him, very devout followers who truly admired Comte. They would listen to him, tell them what they should do for various aspects of their life. He would give them advice about their sex lives, about how they should select a partner for marriage, about their diet, about their family relations, etc. And as I said, Comte tried to replace the Catholic Church with the religion of humanity. However, he fell well short of this goal. Luther and Jesse Bernard, in their historiography on this topic, they show that in 1867 there were only 46 contributions made toward the advancement of the religion of humanity, and these contributions added up to a mere $750. That is $13,000 in by today's currency. So fell well short of the goal. However, the followers he did have were truly devout followers. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a clip that I want you to watch on Comte's Religion of Humanity. Okay. All right, so we're now going to turn to today's reading in selections in Introduction to Positive Philosophy. This will help you understand what is meant by positivism. Auguste Comte is most well known for being the father of positivism, a positivist sociology. We will get into exactly what that means. Probably the most fundamental thing to understand about Comte's positivist system is what he refers to as being 3 stages of human thought that he identifies. There have been 3 stages of knowledge that human beings have had, and we have advanced through them. And they are also stages that are seen as not being compatible with one another. So we started with a theological, what Comte calls a fictitious stage. Then human beings moved into the metaphysical or abstract and philosophical stage. And then finally, Comte wants to move humanity into a positivist or scientific stage. He hopes to be able to overcome theological and metaphysical accounts of society and bring the study of society to its positivist or scientific stage. He makes the case in the text that you could see on the first couple of pages that theology, metaphysics, and positivism, in his view, radically oppose one another. Those who want to hold on to both, Comte forced the issue with them. They cannot hold on to both theology and science. They would need to pick one. These are incompatible modes of thought. They are in tension with one another. He describes positivism as the end goal. Theology, he likens to a state of mind that is very much similar to the state of mind of a child. He says that a man is a theologian in childhood and a metaphysician in youth. Metaphysics might be an advancement out of theology, but it is still imperfect. It still falls short of the ultimate goal of positivist thinking. A theologian in childhood, a metaphysician in youth, and a positivist in manhood. Positivism is understood as a philosophy for understanding the world solely through observable facts. Everything that we contend about society, Comte says, must have an empirical basis, an observable basis. It's worth noting that Comte used very, at least by today's standards, very aggressive rhetoric toward theology and metaphysics. More so theology than metaphysics, however. He claims that the theological stage is childlike. He claims that theological stage is a fictitious realm of thinking. He calls it a primitive stage of thought, etc. And as we will get into later in the semester, this is not uncommon for early social theorists of the time to speak with quite a bit of disdain toward religion and religious thinking, and trying to overcome religious thought through the scientific method. Comte then turns to a sort of hierarchy of the sciences, going from most basic, least complex, that meaning at mathematics down there at the below, toward a science of greater complexity, which he considers sociology to be the most complex science and mathematics to be the most basic science. This is not to say that natural sciences like math and astronomy and physics are easy and basic and don't require rigorous and complicated thinking. That's not what Comte means. We'll get into how complexity is a matter of not being able to determine generalizability as easily. It is harder for sociologists, for example, to make more general law-like claims about the world than it is for a mathematician or an astronomer, for example. We'll get more into that on the next slide. However, so when he says that mathematics is basic and the least complex, he's not saying that it's easy and that mathematicians are pursuing a simplistic line of inquiry. Not at all. In fact, you might be able to, with some legitimate basis, say it's quite the reverse. If you look at mathematicians in comparison to sociologists today. He claims that sociology, unlike fields like mathematics and physics, are the most complex, and therefore it is the most difficult to get sociology into its positivist stage. It is the most complicated, so its progress toward a positivist scientific stage has been the slowest. It is an increase in complexity and a decrease in generality we see here going from the bottom up to the top through mathematics, astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, and then to sociology. When Comte was writing, he claimed that sociology still had not yet reached its positivist stage. It was still largely stuck within the metaphysical stage to most Comtean thinkers at the time. And I will say that I think that most sociologists who have at least considered Comte's system with some careful thought would concur that sociology still is not within its positivist stage, and that the positivist stage for sociology is an impossibility. So we'll get more into how it is that math and physics and whatnot are considered to be more basic and less complicated than sociology. This becomes quite clear if we all turn to page 57. On the third paragraph down, starting with the words "it follows," I'm going to read. It says, "It follows from the foregoing discussion that the positive philosophy is naturally divided into 5 fundamental sciences, whose succession is determined by a necessary and invariable subordination, founded merely on a thorough comparison of the corresponding phenomena, quite apart from any hypothetical view on the subject." I'm going to pause right there for a moment and notice that he's talking about the 5 fundamental sciences here, and as you could see pictured, there are 6 sciences. He starts with 5 in earlier chapters of this volume, excluding mathematics, but then he gets into in the following section more about the basicness or the basic nature, I should say, of mathematics. He decides that math deserves its own chapter completely. We're not going to have time to get into that section today. Although he's saying 5 here, please note that it is actually 6 that he ultimately comes to. I'm continuing to read from on page 57. These sciences are astronomy, physics, chemistry, physiology, and lastly, social physics. He's there using Saint-Simon's term. The first considers the most general, simple, and abstract phenomena, those which are most remote from human interests. They affect all other phenomena, without in turn being influenced by them. The phenomena considered by the last science are, on the contrary, the most special, complicated, and concrete phenomena, those which most directly concern human interests. They depend more or less upon all the preceding phenomena, without, however, exercising any influence upon them. Okay. That was somewhat philosophically complicated language, so we're going to break it down a little bit slowly here. The most basic science is not dependent on human actions. Math is going to be what math is going to be, regardless of human interests, regardless of human actions, regardless of what human beings do. 1 plus 1 is 2, regardless of what human interests are, and it always will be 2. The most general and simple sciences are able to affect other phenomena, meaning math and astronomy are able to affect the rest of the world, but the rest of the world does not influence math and astronomy. It is a one-way road. It's or unidirectional, as some might say. It is the influence comes from math and physics toward, let's say, the human realm, whereas the human realm, human interests and actions, cannot have a mutual influence. They don't influence it back. They're only influenced by math and astronomy. On the other hand, the most complicated science, sociology, is so definitionally connected to human interests and actions. Sociology is much more variable. It's so hard to establish laws in sociology because of ever-changing human conditions, whether cultural or historical conditions. It is a science that is very much influenced by the social world, very much influenced by human actions. Whereas before I said 1 plus 1 equals 2, and that doesn't, and no matter what human beings do, sociology and the results sociologists find very much depend upon what human beings do. That's the very nature of the study. So for this reason, it is difficult for much more difficult for sociologists to make general claims about society, to generalize, to make law-like claims. It would be actually an impossibility, and it is therefore the slowest of the sciences in its progress toward the scientific or positivist stage. Now, regarding this hierarchy of the science, Comte claims that social science cannot be pursued if we do not first understand the sciences that preceded it. Meaning, social scientists need to understand how other sciences developed if they are going to allow social science to develop. They need to understand the history and the development of astronomy, of physics, of math, etc. This is just as a side note, everything that I'm saying in these slides and in slides about other theorists, I'm only presenting what the argument is. I'm not claiming that the argument is correct or that sociologists today still adhere to it. This precondition for social science, that social scientists need to understand the development of math and astronomy, etc., is not accepted today. It is incredibly rare for sociologists to have an understanding of the developments of previous sciences that preceded it. Comte wasn't really in a university space and didn't have too many people to, let's say, get some constructive criticism from. So some of his ideas seem a little bit out there, including, I imagine that his notion of religion of humanity might have been curbed had he had some like-minded peers to influence him. But he claims here that the disciplines need to be studied in their proper order because ideas are associated with another on the basis of this ordering, that there is a sort of really kind of a social aspect underlying the scientific ordering of the sciences. So the way in which one idea comes about is dependent upon how this idea came about in the previous science. So to go on with the next succession, that being sociology as he sees it, the sociologist would need to understand how sciences before sociology proceeded. So for him, he makes the case that math must be the true starting point for all scientific education because it preceded all other sciences. It was the first, it is the most basic, it is the least complex, and it is the one that has reached positivism more successfully than any other science in its ability to make general statements and also in its lack of dependability on human interests and actions. So positivism, according to Comte, is meant to displace theology and metaphysics. Theology and metaphysics are stages of human thought that must be overcome if we are to solve social problems, achieve social order, and social harmony. They are not stages that get to continue to exist in Comte's mind. They are stages of thought that must be overcome by positivist thinking, scientific methods of thinking. It is for this reason that Comte claims that having knowledge about theology and metaphysics will only be worthwhile for mere historical interest. If you happen to be interested in history and sort of as out of quixotic curiosity, you want to study how theological and metaphysical knowledge were developed in the past, then that's perfectly fine. But to actually but it's only fine in terms of historical interest. It is not going to be useful, according to Comte, as it can apply to the study of the social world. These are, quote unquote, radically incompatible stages of thought. Now, of course, nobody is quite this radical in their positivism in sociology, in most sociology departments today. This has kind of been labeled as an impossible goal for sociology to be studied in the same way of chemistry or physics. And it's also worth noting here that there's a great irony to Comte's theorizing, because the book, as you could see today, his conclusions that he's making depend upon a non-empirical logic. He himself is philosophizing to reach the conclusions that he is reaching. He is not using the scientific method to advance this theoretical knowledge. He is not using positivism. There are no tables and figures in the reading today. He's not using mathematics or astronomy or physics or the scientific method at all. He is using a stage of thought that he claims should be overcome, that being philosophical thought. Of course, you could say there's a counter to this I'm not going to get into, that he is using a form of logical positivism rather than a methodological positivism. But that is maybe meant for a different lecture, because we would really be getting quite into the weeds with that. But there's an irony underlying all of this talk of having sociological thought and general knowledge to be entirely dependent upon scientific method and positivism. Now, to Comte's credit, he makes it clear that he is not trying to say that through positivism that we can have a universal explanation, that we can know all as long as science continues to advance. He is not claiming that we can get to the stage of universal explanation, though he contradicts himself on this contention and other parts, saying that society should be studied through invariable laws, which is some have said is synonymous with reaching universal explanations. But at least in the reading today on page 31, he makes a caveat saying that this is not his intention, and he clarifies by noting some of the limitations of human knowledge, claiming, quote, "I believe that the resources of the human mind are too feeble and the universe is too complicated to admit of our ever attaining such scientific perfection." So this is a reasonable qualification here. He doesn't always make such a qualification. Like I said, there are other places in his writing that would seem to contradict this description. He's not quite all that consistent in this regard, though with all this talk of positivism and reaching the scientific phase of thought and overcoming theology and overcoming metaphysics, it is worth pointing out that he would, at least in some writings, qualify and say that a universal explanation cannot be reached through the limitations of the human mind and the complications of the universe. Now, in the next slide, I have a lecture that you can watch. It's kind of long, but if you are interested in the lecture today, please do watch it. It's quite interesting. Other than that, I'm going to end my audio recording here. Thank you so much for listening, and yeah, thank you.
Okay, and lastly, I just want you to watch these videos. I'm unable to include them as videos in the slides because of copyright issues with YouTube. However, I will be posting this PowerPoint up to D2L, so you could copy and paste the links in there. Thank you very much for attending this lecture.